Finally, we get to musical timing. Many music tutorials begin with counting and rhythms before progressing to notes and chords, but I wanted to jump right into the fun stuff. Starting a music lesson with counting is like a recording class that won't let you touch the mixing console until after you learn how to solder microphone wires. Basic note lengths were shown earlier to help follow the examples, but now we'll explore this aspect of music in more depth. As explained earlier, the numbers at the left of the staff at the beginning of a piece identify its time signature, which in this case is 4/4. The upper 4 is the number of beats in each measure, and the lower 4 is the length of each beat, which is 1/4 note. To recap, a whole note extends for all 4 beats of the bar, or for however many beats are present for other time signatures. Half notes extend for 2 beats, and quarter notes are 1 beat each. There are also 8th and 16th notes that extend for half and 1/4 beat respectively, as well as dotted notes that extend for half again longer than their normal duration. For every available note duration, there's also a corresponding rest. A rest allocates space when no notes are playing, which is needed to keep the beats in a bar aligned. Further, every bar must contain the appropriate number of beats, whether or not notes are playing. Shown from left to right is a whole rest, half rest, dotted half rest, quarter rest, dotted quarter rest, and so forth through the plain and dotted 8th and 16th rests. When a series of notes are to be played twice each, slashes are used as shorthand. In this example, each 8th note is played as a pair of 16th notes. A related effect is tremolo, where a single note is struck repeatedly and quickly for its stated duration. This is a common playing technique for the mandolin, though it should not be confused with the electronic tremolo effect that modulates the volume. Most music is written in 4/4, including rock and pop tunes, marches, and many classical symphonies. Since 4/4 is so common, it's also known as common time. Instead of showing a 4 over a 4, a letter C is used as shorthand. Another popular time signature is 2/4, also known as cut time, which is optionally shown as a C with a line through it. Equally popular is 3/4 time, also known as waltz time, though it doesn't have to be that style of music. For example, Take It to the Limit by the Eagles, Norwegian Wood by the Beatles, and the folk ballad Greensleeves are in 3/4 time. Accents are shown here because most music naturally emphasizes the first beat in the bar. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Even though there are only 3 beats in a 3/4 bar, or 2 in a bar of 2/4 time, they're still called quarter notes and each has a duration of 1 beat. There's also 6/8 time. Technically, each 8th note is 1 beat, but they're interpreted as triplets within a 2-beat framework. 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. We'll get to triplets and other tuplets shortly. Words in popular songs and classical opera are outside the scope of music theory, but the rhythmic aspect of lyrics is worth mentioning. Words have syllables with specific accents, and those accents shouldn't compete with accents inherent in a melody. Consider the jazz standard The Girl from Ipanema by Antonio Carlos Jobim. You can hear that accents fall naturally on the high D notes, mainly because they're the highest notes.
Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes each one...
For fun, let's replace the original lyrics with You Are My Sunshine. Now those musical high notes force accents on the wrong syllable. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine, you make me happy when skies are. This is why I cringe every time I hear Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. When the rain washes you clean, you'll know. To me, this just sounds lame, no matter how many copies of the song were sold. But art is art, and songwriters will do whatever they want, and nobody can call them wrong. Many simple melodies begin on the first beat of a bar, but some melodies use an upbeat, also called a pickup note, where the melody begins before the downbeat that starts each bar. A pickup note can be any duration, but most are 8th notes or quarter notes as shown here in Tonight from West Side Story. Technically, the first pickup note in this melody should be preceded by a rest to show the note starting on the 4th beat. But convention omits that rest, and everyone understands that the pickup note is on beat 4. Upbeats are not limited to a single note. The classic folk melody Oh Susanna has a 2-note pickup. Pickup notes don't even have to be the same duration, as you can see with this 3-note pickup at the opening of La Marseillaise, the national anthem of France. As an aside, string players often use an up bow for upbeats and a down bow for notes that start on the beat. I'll demonstrate up bows and down bows using the cello shortly. Although it's more common in classical music than pop tunes, the time signature can change for 1 bar or several bars. In this example from my cello concerto, a single bar of 2/4 is within a 4/4 section to add variety. This next example, also from my concerto, shows 5 bars of 3/4 within a 4/4 section. Note the double-dotted quarter notes in the 2 bars after the change to 3/4 time. Where a single dot extends a note for half again longer, a double dot makes it 3/4 longer. That is, the second dot adds half again more length to the first dot. So instead of following a dotted quarter note with an 8th note to fill out 2 beats, a double-dotted quarter note is followed by a 16th note. The generic term for notes that are squeezed or stretched in time is tuplets, as in quadruplets and quintuplets, though the most common tuplet is the triplet. Triplets squeeze 3 equally spaced notes into the time of 2, but there are other variants, such as 5 in the time of 4, or even 9 in the time of 8, when the composer wants a run of notes to start and end on specific pitches, but that's not possible with only 8 notes. Since triplets put 3 notes into the time of 2, they usually make a passage play faster than regular notes. But they can also be used for a slowing effect, and this example shows the difference. Triplets were common in 1960s pop hits by the Four Seasons and many others. This example from Take Good Care of My Baby by Bobby V shows triplets used as a device to propel a key change. The opposite happens when the time signature is in 3 or 6 and you want to expand 2 notes to fill the space of 3 notes. In that case, they're called duplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. This is from a drum part my friend Scott Liebisch played from one of my pop tunes. You can see a number of different complex timings in triplets, including 16th note triplets within an 8th note triplet at the bottom. Even though there are only 2 16th notes within those 8th note triplets, they're still triplets because there would be 6 of them in the group. This isn't how drum parts are usually written, but spreading the drums and cymbals across 3 staves makes the notes easier to follow in these examples. Now let's back up a bit and look at some basics. In these examples, a drum beat is a repeating rhythmic pattern, as opposed to the unit of time that defines how many beats are in each bar of music. A typical simple drum beat is kick, snare, usually with a hi-hat playing steady 8th notes with an accent on beats 1 and 3 as shown at top. The kick is a bass drum that's struck using a beater attached to a foot pedal, and the hi-hat is a pair of cymbals attached to a foot pedal that can also be struck with drumsticks. The X with a circle indicates that the hi-hat is played open, with the cymbals separated, which leads nicely to the closed hi-hat that follows. So the sound is like tick, 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 ticks, tick, 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 ticks, tick. For music that requires a faster feel, the hi-hat, or a shaker or tambourine, might play continuous 16th notes with the first note of each group of 4 accented, as in the lower line. Although it's not shown here, a cymbal crash can be used as an accent every 4 or 8 bars, often on a downbeat at the start of a measure. A snare roll or pattern, or a tom-tom fill typically precedes that downbeat. Or instead of a tom fill, a cymbal swell can be used to let the listener know that a new section is coming. Obviously, drum beats can be much more complex, such as this example from my television music video. The backbeat is on beats 2 and 4 and is usually played with a snare drum, 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to the main beats on 1 and 3 played by the kick drum. Often hand claps or finger snaps are added to bolster the backbeat on 2 and 4 to make it even stronger. It's equally common for a rhythm guitar to play short staccato chords on 2 and 4, and even country fiddlers do that when they're not soloing. Of course, with music there are no rules that can't be broken, and I'm just describing how simple beats are constructed for pop music. For many types of jazz, a triplet feel is integral to the style. This is also called a swing feel. Rather than notate triplets for each musician's part throughout the entire piece, jazz arrangers use jazz eighths, as shown here. Only 2 eighth notes are written, but it's implied that the first one holds for 2/3 of a beat and the second holds for 1/3 of the beat, which makes the music swing. Here's what that sounds like. The instrumentation for most classical music doesn't include a drum set, so composers and arrangers instead use rhythmic figures played by the melodic instruments. These examples from my cello concerto show various ways to establish a rhythmic beat without requiring a drum set. I did something similar with my Accelerando music video using a rhythm I call the gallop. One of the most important properties of a piece of music is its tempo, or speed. Classical music uses terms such as allegro and largo, the Italian words for fast and slow, respectively. When composers or songwriters want to be very specific, they'll also add a tempo in beats per minute, where each beat is 1 quarter note. Tempo is written in classical scores using an appropriate Italian term, optionally with a quarter note symbol and numeric metronome tempo. In the upper example, the length of 1 quarter note is such that 52 of them occupy a period of 1 minute. In other words, this tempo is 52 beats per minute. Some tempos are extremely slow, such as the Adagio ma non troppo second movement of the Dvorak cello concerto, where beats per minute is given for 1/8 note instead of a quarter note. Earlier I mentioned legato and staccato playing styles, where legato notes sustain for their full duration to blend seamlessly from one note to the next, versus staccato notes that are short and distinct with silence between them. In Italian, staccato means detached. But legato and staccato can also be specified for individual notes using the system of dashes and dots shown here. A dash line tells the musician to play a note for its full duration in a flowing style, and a dot means to play the note short with a pause afterward to fill out the designated length. How short a note should be depends on the style of the music and the preference of the performer or conductor. The note could be held for half its normal length as at left, or even shorter as at right, where it's held for only 1/4 its stated duration. As you can see, adding a staccato dot to a note is much easier to write and to read than a note followed by a rest, especially when there are many such notes in a passage. Note that the dots above or below a note to specify staccato should not be confused with dotted notes that add 50% to their duration, as in this example shown earlier. When extending a note's length, the dot is to the right of the note head, rather than above or below it to indicate staccato. Besides the basic tempo of a piece or section, tempos can vary faster or slower to let the music breathe, for lack of a better word. When a section should speed up to add excitement, that's notated as accelerando, as in accelerate. Notice in this example from my cello concerto the finger numbers above certain notes. Fingerings are usually notated by an expert player hired by the music publisher to help guide the performer, or at least suggest a starting point. The opposite of accelerando is ritardando, or rallentando, often abbreviated in printed music as retard or simply rit. Then at some point later the marking a tempo is written to resume at the original tempo. In this example the notation is molto retard, where molto is Italian for very much. Another type of temporary tempo change is called rubato, where the musician varies the timing freely by stealing time from some notes to extend others and vice versa. In Italian, rubato means literally to rob. Obviously this is not practical for an entire orchestra, but it's common for soloists to vary their timing subtly while the other players maintain a steady tempo. As long as the overall length of each bar remains more or less the same, the timing between notes can be altered either a little or a lot. Often rubato is combined with a ritardando. This fragment from the Rococo Variations for Cello and Orchestra by Tchaikovsky is a great example. Without rubato, every eighth note would have the same length, making the music sound much less expressive. Another temporary timing shift is the fermata, introduced earlier in the example from Bach's Chorale No. 8. This half circle with a dot tells the player to hold that one note or chord longer than its written duration. In this example, Jackie Ivanko sings Puccini's O mio babbino cara. As a testament to the power of the fermata, when Jackie held that high note at her debut performance on the TV show America's Got Talent, the entire audience gasped and cheered. The apostrophe shown here specifies a brief pause, creating an effect similar to that of a comma in speech. It's equivalent to a rest with a fermata, where the length of the pause is determined by the soloist or conductor. The same apostrophe is also used in music for singers and brass and woodwind players, not to add a pause, but rather to show where they should take a breath. In that case, the symbol is called a breath mark. Waltzes often have an implied apostrophe called a Luftpause that extends the third beat of certain measures. The pause can be subtle or extreme, and it adds a stylistic lilt to the music. A Luftpause is not notated in waltzes. Conductors and players already know to add this pause, and the apostrophe is shown here just for clarity. An example of a subtle pause is the waltz from Die Fledermaus by Johann Strauss. Most music uses simple 2, 3, or 4-bar time signatures, but there are many others. One example is 5/4 time, made popular by the Dave Brubeck Quartet playing Paul Desmond's jazz standard Take 5. Another example of 5/4 time is Lalo Schifrin's theme from Mission Impossible. Note that the underlying rhythm is the eighth notes playing a compound time pattern, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2, 1-2. That's why the eighth notes played by the piano and bass are grouped as shown, rather than as 4 notes together as for music in 4/4 or 2/4 time. Compound time was also used to great effect by Leonard Bernstein in his song America from the musical West Side Story. Here the timing is 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. and the time signature is actually written that way to show that 1 bar of 6/8 is followed by 1 bar of 3/4 repeatedly throughout the song.
I like to be in America, okay by me in America, everything free in America, for a small fee in America.
Another type of complex rhythm is the polyrhythm, where 2 different time patterns are played simultaneously. This example plays 2 in the bass against 3 in the treble, though many other such combinations are possible. As we've seen, a normal beat in 4/4 time has a strong accent on 1 and 3, and a lesser accent on 2 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Syncopation puts the emphasis between the beats, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Most people easily feel syncopation naturally, though it's fairly complex. This is a boring bass line, reminiscent of an organ you'd hear at a ballpark. The pitch of the bass is 1 octave higher than written here, to be sure the notes are heard on laptop speakers. This bass line is similar, but is made much more exciting by syncopation. The first note in each bar is on the 1 beat, but all the other notes are on the ands between the beats. Both of these bars sound the same, but the second is technically more correct because the main beats are visible in the tied 8th notes. Good musicians can read and play either version just as easily. A similar concept is anticipation, where a note, usually a downbeat that begins a new measure, is played early. Here the final note starts early for added emphasis. Anticipation is used in You're All I Need to Get By, shown earlier in the example for pedal tones, where the bass plays the same note as the chords change. Here, both the singer and bass player anticipate each measure by an 8th note. These bass notes sound like quarter notes that sustain for a full beat because 2 8th notes are tied across the measure boundary. In the song Who Loves You by the Four Seasons, bass player Don Ciccone plays entire sections ahead of the beat, which really helps propel the song. The main purpose of a conductor or band leader is to set the tempo and guide the players to keep them together in time. Entire books have been written about conducting an orchestra, and I can cover only the basics here. Orchestra players on an auditorium stage can be 50 feet apart or more between the percussion on the left and the cellos and basses on the right. Sound travels at about 1 foot per millisecond, and 50 milliseconds is a noticeable time delay. The conductor is centered in front of the players, so they follow his gestures rather than rely entirely on hearing the other musicians. An orchestra conductor also interprets the music by deciding the tempos for each section, as well as dictating both the overall volume and the volume of each section. A conductor is not unlike a movie director who uses his own personal vision to guide the performance. Both follow a fixed script, but there's still a lot of room for interpretation. Some conductors use only their hands, but most hold a baton in the right hand so players in the rear of the orchestra can see more easily. The left hand is also used, mainly for expression and to tell players if they're too loud or soft, or to otherwise control the flow of the music. An orchestra conductor or musical director doesn't have to be good at public speaking or have a pleasing voice, but it's important to communicate effectively. You can't be self-conscious when telling others what to do, especially with student groups where the conductor may have to sing parts out loud to guide beginners. Another important skill is speaking timings. Everyone knows how to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But you also have to count subdivisions. For 8th notes we say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 16th notes are counted as 1E and 2E and, while triplets can be said as 1 and 2 and triplet 1 and. Being able to count subdivisions is also important for performers to understand music with complex timing, though they don't need to count out loud. I've played in many orchestras and worked with many conductors. My favorite conductor is Maestro Richard Brooks, who will explain more about the skills required to lead an orchestra. How do you choose pieces to do when you're running an orchestra, like when I was with you in the community orchestra? What criteria do you use?
I'm in a unique position in that I work primarily with young people and amateurs. A professional conductor, music director can pretty much program to their heart's desire and look for pieces that they can unify into a program that somehow relate to each other. My goal when I'm programming is to try to keep everybody playing something interesting. The idea is that, for example, if I've got a full trombone section, I'm not going to be tackling Haydn where there's no trombones, or Mozart, I need to keep everybody busy. So I look for works that will relate to the orchestra and that will give everybody something to play.
From your perspective, how much preparation do you have to put into preparing for a piece?
It depends on the piece, obviously. If it's a brand new piece, quite a bit of time. I sit down and I study the score. I try to secure a recording of it, and I go through and I make a lot of marks to determine, I try to determine what do we really want to hear here. I mark cues that I feel are absolutely necessary. And you study the score and you listen to the piece and you work through it. In some cases, you look for little problem spots, things that are going to be potential train wrecks. And, you make circles or eyeglasses or something, and you try to deal with that from there. On the other hand, if it's a piece that I've conducted many times before, lots of times I will just go into a rehearsal. I'll just take the score off my shelf, pack it in my bag, and go to rehearsal. And when I get there, it's just like, oh yeah, I remember this. So I've always felt like the composers who conduct their own works are usually the most boring performances. It usually takes a good interpreter, another conductor, to sort of inject something into that, because the composers have worked with the nuts and bolts of that piece so much that the interpretive process is not really there.
You also work with professional orchestras and conduct at a much higher level than high school kids. What's the difference in your approach?
Well, with a professional orchestra, you try to let them play more. With young people, for example, and amateurs, I really don't stray from a beat pattern. With a professional group, you can do that. You can watch professional conductors like Herbert von Karajan and never see a single beat pattern at all. You'll see shaping of phrases, you'll see dynamics, you'll see a couple of cues here and there. But, I watch some of those conductors, and for the life of me, I'm not really sure what they're doing. With professionals, you can sort of slack off. I think I had mentioned to you about a performance I often show my students of Ravel's Bolero, and Daniel Barenboim is conducting the Berlin Philharmonic. And at times he just stands there like this on the podium and just lets them play. I mean, the snare drum is going dum, digga da dum, digga da dum, dum. So the snare drum's keeping count. There's no reason for him to be up there beating time. So he just stands back and listens to the orchestra and lets them play, and just cues an entrance here, cues an entrance here. A couple of times when he's a little rhythm he may conduct, but he basically just hangs out listening to the orchestra and lets them go. I should say, a cue is when you bring somebody in, usually after an extended period of rests. And it's twofold. It doesn't mean that they can't count their rests. The cue is supposed to be an assurance to them that they did count their rests right. So they count their rests, they get ready, they look at the conductor for some assurance, and when the conductor gives them a cue, like you, boom, they know that this is the entrance.
The last thing is if you could just demonstrate the main patterns.
Patterns are fairly universal. Every conductor kind of puts their own spin on the patterns. But the basic one, if we start with 4/4, most common time, is basically kind of a down, left, right, up. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4. And the conductor can either, if you're doing something very staccato, very marked, you might conduct it very precise like this. Or if you're doing something very legato and singing and melodic, you might kind of open that up to a little bit more of a flowing type of 4. And that one's pretty universal. I mean, people put a little spin on it. 2 is usually done kind of like a J. You kind of come down and up, down, up. But I've seen conductors do down, up, down, up. But the thing to remember is in conducting, the downbeat will always be 1. That beat coming down will always be 1. So if I'm in 2, 1, 1. And if I'm doing this, 1. It's still going to be that downbeat. 3 is kind of a triangle. 1, 2, 3, 1. And some I kind of come over here and then up. But basically they teach it, just like kind of like a triangle. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And of course a fast 3 can be in 1, which is just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And sometimes even a fast 2 can be conducted in 1. What we try to avoid is doing things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you get to that tempo, you usually break it into a smaller unit of beat so that you're not up there, doing that.
Well, how about 6/8?
6/8 is usually broken down to 2. If it's very slow, though, you'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then when it gets to be faster, it breaks into it's a duple meter, so it breaks into 2. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which brings up an interesting case of semantics here, because I often ask my students, what's the difference between 6/8 and 3/4? 3/4 notes are the same as 6/8 notes. So what's the difference between these two time signatures? And it breaks down the fact that 3 is a triple meter. There's 3 precise units of beat. So if you were to write eighth notes in 3/4, you would have 3 groups of 2 eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and dot, 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 dot. Whereas 6/8, being a duple meter, breaks down to 2 units of 3 eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And you use the other hand to...
The other hand is used primarily for cueing, bringing in entrances, for indicating dynamics, loud, soft. Phrasing, you might, a long phrase, you might conduct a phrase here. The left hand is done more for expressive elements of the conducting, where this is keeping the rudimentary beat going. The interesting thing about conducting is I don't think there's any 2 conductors in the world that conduct identically the same. It's still kind of a loose area. You study conducting, you learn how to study a score, you learn the basics, and then it's off to the races. Figure out your own gesture vocabulary and go from there.